The morning of my husband's funeral, his mother walked into my kitchen and told me to move my car out of the driveway so her sister could park there. Not good morning. Not how are you holding up. Not the children are asking for you. Just move your car, Renata. My sister needs the spot. I was standing at the kitchen counter in the dress I had laid out the night before because I knew if I didn't lay it out the night before, I would stand in the closet that morning and not be able to think, and Marcus would, and then I would remember again, for the 400th time in 4 days, that Marcus was not going to need to remind me of anything ever again. I moved the car. I came back inside and helped arrange the food that 37 members of Marcus's family had brought to my house over the previous 4 days. Food I hadn't asked for and couldn't eat. Casseroles and pound cakes and pots of things covered in foil that lined every surface of my kitchen like an edible memorial that nobody was going to touch. I helped my daughter Simone get dressed. She was 7 years old and she asked me, while I was buttoning her dress, why Daddy wasn't going to be at his own funeral, and I told her that Daddy would be there, he just wouldn't be standing up, and she thought about this for a moment and said okay, and let me do her hair. I did not cry during the funeral. I cried once, 2 nights before, alone in the laundry room at 2 in the morning with the dryer running because the noise helped. One time, completely, for about 25 minutes. And then I sealed it up because I had a 7-year-old who needed me to be the standing up parent, and I have never in my life had the option of falling apart without consequence, and I wasn't going to start learning it at the worst possible moment. My husband Marcus died at 38 years old, 11 days after his diagnosis. A brain tumor that nobody had known was there until he had a seizure at his desk at work on a Thursday afternoon in February. And by the time I got to the hospital and the doctors had done the scans, the thing had a name and a prognosis, and the prognosis was measured in weeks rather than months. We had 13 days. We spent most of them in the hospital and some of them at home when he was strong enough. And we talked the way you talk when you have 13 days in a lifetime of things unsaid, and a daughter who comes in and out of the room and whom you are trying to protect, and also trying to include because she deserves to know her father is saying goodbye, even if she can't fully understand what goodbye means, at 7 years old. On the 9th day, Marcus told me about the house. I need to explain the house, because the house is everything. Marcus and I had bought it 4 years before he died. A 3-bedroom in a neighborhood we loved, close to good schools, with a backyard big enough that Simone could have the childhood outside that Marcus had had, and that I had not. We'd saved for 6 years for the down payment, during which time we rented an apartment that was fine and that I'd made as warm as I could, and that was not a home the way the house was a home. The house was ours, but the house was in Simone's name. This was Marcus's idea, and I want to be careful here about how I explain it because the idea itself was not bad. The idea came from a conversation we'd had with a financial advisor 2 years into saving for the house about estate planning and tax strategy and the best structural approach for a family that was building assets and wanted to protect them long term. The advisor had walked us through several options, and one of them was placing the property in a trust with Simone as the beneficiary, with Marcus and me as trustees, which would provide certain protections and benefits that I am not a lawyer and cannot fully explain, but that made sense to us when the advisor explained them. What we had not done, because we were 32 and 34 years old and nobody thinks they are going to die at 38, was complete the trust documentation properly. What we had done in an early stage of setting it up was transfer the deed to Simone's name with the intention of formalizing the trust structure around it. The trust was never finalized. The deed was in Simone's name. Marcus told me this on the 9th day in the hospital. He told me with the specific, exhausted clarity of a man who has accepted what is happening to him and is trying to make sure the people he loves will be okay on the other side of it. He told me that the deed was in Simone's name and that this was important and that I needed to talk to a lawyer as soon as possible and get the trust formalized and make sure I was named as trustee with full authority so that I could manage the property on her behalf until she was an adult. He told me to do it soon. He told me not to wait. He died on the 11th day. I did not call a lawyer in the 4 days between his death and his funeral because I was managing the death of my husband at 31 years old with a 7-year-old daughter and 37 members of my husband's family rotating through my house and the weight of grief that I was carefully and deliberately not feeling yet because I couldn't afford to feel it yet. That was the first mistake. The second mistake was not knowing at the time that my mother-in-law had already started making calls. Her name was Gloria Tate, and she was 64 years old, and she had loved her son with the specific and total intensity of a woman for whom motherhood was not a role, but an identity. I understood that love. I had witnessed it for the 10 years Marcus and I were together. I had sometimes been frustrated by it and sometimes moved by it and always, underneath everything, respected it. Because she had raised a man who was kind and funny and patient and present, and those things don't happen accidentally. What I had not fully understood in 10 years of being Marcus's wife was the architecture of what Gloria believed about her son's life and her place in it. She had not loved me with the same intensity. She had been civil to me, warm, at times genuinely. But there was a register in which she had never quite accepted me, and I'd always known it without being able to point to anything specific. I was not from their family. I was not from their church. I was not from their neighborhood. I had opinions about things she felt I shouldn't have opinions about. I made decisions with Marcus that she felt should have included her. Marcus had navigated it the way good men navigate complicated family dynamics, imperfectly, with love, trying to protect everyone and succeeding most of the time. When he was alive, Gloria's feelings about me were manageable because Marcus was the buffer. He was the point of the triangle that held the shape. When Marcus died, the triangle collapsed. It collapsed faster than I could have prepared for, even if I had known to prepare. 8 days after the funeral, Gloria came to the house. She didn't come alone. She brought her two sisters, Margin and Delphine, and her husband Earl, my father-in-law, a quiet man who I had always liked and who I think had always liked me, but who, when Gloria decided something, became a man of very few words and a general policy of not intervening. I made them coffee. I sat at the kitchen table with them. Simone was at my mother's house because she'd had a hard night, and my mother had come to give me a few hours. Gloria said, "We need to talk about what happens next." I said, "Okay." What happened next, according to Gloria, was this. Since the house was in Simone's name, and since Simone was a minor, and since Marcus was gone, the responsible thing was to make sure that Simone had proper family support and structure. Proper family structure. She said those three words with the weight of terms that had been carefully chosen. Then she said that she and Earl would like to move into the house to help with Simone. I looked at her. "Move in," I said. "To help with Simone," she said. "She needs her grandparents right now. She needs family." "She has me," I said. "I'm her mother." "Of course you are." Gloria's voice was very even, very carefully even, and we would never suggest otherwise. "But you're grieving too, Renata. You've lost your husband. You need support. We want to be here for both of you." I looked at Marjorie and Delphine and Earl. Margine was looking at the table. Delphine was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Earl was looking at his coffee. "I appreciate that," I said, "but I don't think that's what we need right now." Gloria's expression shifted. Just slightly. A recalibration that was very small and very legible to me because I had been watching Gloria Tate's expressions for 10 years. "Renata," she said, "the house is in Simone's name. I know that. And as Simone's grandparents, you have a relationship with your granddaughter," I said. "I'm glad she has that. But you don't have a legal claim to this house, and neither does she, in a way that supersedes my right to live in it. I'm her mother. This is our home." Gloria looked at me for a long moment. "We should probably all talk to a lawyer," she said. "Yes," I said, "we should." She left 20 minutes later with her sisters and Earl. The goodbye was polite. Everything was polite. That was the thing about Gloria. She was always polite. The politeness was not warmth. It was a container for things that were not polite. I sat at the kitchen table after they left and thought about what Marcus had said on the 9th day. Do it soon. Don't wait. I called a lawyer the next morning. The lawyer's name was Patricia Okafor. My neighbor had used her for an estate matter 2 years before and described her as someone who did not waste words. That description was accurate. She was 50-something, direct, and had the specific quality of someone who had seen enough family situations in crisis that she had developed a clear taxonomy for them and could identify yours within the first 10 minutes of a conversation. She identified mine in about 7. "Tell me about the deed," she said. I told her everything. The financial advisor, the trust structure, the transfer of the deed, the incomplete documentation, Marcus dying before we'd formalized it. She asked me several questions, and I answered them, and she took notes, and then she sat back and looked at me. "The deed is in your daughter's name," she said. "Yes." "Your daughter is 7 years old." "Yes." "Your daughter is 7 years old." "Yes." "There is no trust document naming you as trustee." "No." "And your husband died without a will." I had not known until that moment that Marcus had died without a will. We had talked about making wills. We had meant to make wills. We had, in the way of people who are 32 and 34 and do not think they are going to die, not actually made wills. Patricia Okafor absorbed this information with the calm of someone who has absorbed this information before, in different forms from different people. "Okay," she said, "here's where we are. Where we were was complicated, and I want to explain it as clearly as I can without pretending I understood all of it in real time, because I didn't. I understood it in pieces over several conversations, and each piece landed with a specific weight. Because the deed was in Simone's name and Simone was a minor, she could not legally control the property herself. In the absence of a trust or a designated trustee, the management of property belonging to a minor could be subject to court oversight. This was not automatic, it required a legal process. But it was a real legal mechanism, and if someone chose to invoke it, they could petition the court to appoint a guardian of the estate to manage the property on the minor's behalf. That someone could be me. A parent had strong standing to be appointed guardian of their minor child's estate, but that someone could also theoretically be someone else. Your in-laws, Patricia said, would they actually do that? I asked. Patricia looked at me with the expression of someone who has learned not to underestimate what grieving families will do when property and loss are involved. Have they indicated they want to be involved in the property situation? She said. Yes, I said. Explicitly? Then we need to move quickly, she said. Quickly meant filing a petition with the court to have me named guardian of Simone's estate, including the property. It meant gathering documentation. It meant putting in place the legal infrastructure that Marcus and I had talked about building and had not built, under conditions that were both urgent and terrible. I started the process. Meanwhile, Gloria had gotten a lawyer too. I found this out not from Gloria, but from my sister-in-law Denise, who was Marcus's younger sister and who occupied in the Tate family a position similar to the one my mother occupied in mine. The person who knew what was happening and navigated it with more grace than it deserved and told me things she probably wasn't supposed to tell me because she thought I had a right to know. Denise called me on a Thursday evening 2 weeks after the funeral and told me that Gloria had spoken to a family attorney and had been told, she wasn't sure by whom exactly, some friend's cousin who knew a lawyer, the way these things happen, that because the house was in Simone's name and because Marcus had died without a will, there was a possibility that Marcus's parents had certain rights as Simone's grandparents that could be relevant to the property question. What kind of rights? I said. I don't know exactly, Denise said. She didn't explain it specifically, but she's been talking about it. She's been talking about it a lot. What has she been saying? A pause. She's been saying that you're young and you're grieving and you're not thinking clearly, and that Simone needs family stability and that the house should stay in the family. I processed that. I am the family, I said. I know, Denise said quietly. I know that. Does she think? I stopped. Reorganized. Does she think that she has more right to that house than I do? A long pause. I think, Denise said slowly, that she has convinced herself that she's doing this for Simone. And I think she's in tremendous grief. And she's doing what people in tremendous grief sometimes do, which is to try to control something because everything else is out of control. A pause. I don't think it makes it right. I just think that's what's happening. I thanked her. I called Patricia. I told her what Denise had told me. Patricia said, "How quickly can you get me these documents?" The conversation that I think about the most, the one that I have replayed more times than any other, the one that I still don't fully know how to feel about, happened 3 weeks after the funeral. Gloria called and asked to come over. I said yes because she was Simone's grandmother and Simone loved her, and whatever was happening between Gloria and me in the legal dimension, I was not going to let it swallow the relationship Simone had with the people who had raised the man she'd lost. She came in the afternoon, without the sisters this time, just Gloria and Earl. Earl hugged me at the door. It was a real hug, the kind he'd always given, and I felt in it something he couldn't say out loud. We sat in the living room. Simone was in her room, which she'd been spending a lot of time in since Marcus died. Not in a worrying way, Patricia's recommended child therapist had said, just in the way of a child who needed a bounded space to process something too large for her. Gloria looked around the living room. At the family photos on the shelves, Marcus and me on our wedding day, Simone as a newborn, Marcus and Simone at the beach, all three of us at a birthday party, the whole accumulation of a family life in frames. I miss my son, she said. Her voice broke on son. Just on that one word. I know, I said. I know you do too, she said. I know that. I'm not trying to take that from you. I waited. She stopped, looked at the photo of Marcus and Simone at the beach. He was my child. Before he was your husband, he was my child. I raised him. I knew him in a way that she stopped again. I'm not saying that to diminish what you had. I'm trying to explain what this feels like. I understand that, I said, and I did. I genuinely did. I'm scared, she said. It came out differently than the rest of it. Smaller. Of what? of losing him completely, of he's gone. And I'm afraid that without that will drift away, that Simone will drift away, that I'll lose him and then slowly lose everything that was part of him. I looked at this woman who had, in the previous 2 weeks, set a legal process in motion that threatened my ability to live in my own home, who had come to my house 8 days after her son's funeral and suggested that she and her husband should move in, who had, through the particular machinery of grief and fear, made my worst weeks worse. And I also looked at a 64-year-old woman who had lost her son at 38 years old and was terrified of losing everything connected to him, which was a fear I understood from the inside because it was also my fear in different forms about different things. Gloria, I said, I am not going to take Simone from you. She loves you. She needs you right now. That is not in question. She looked at me. But I need you to hear me say something clearly, I said. This is my house, not because of a legal argument, though that argument is also true, because Marcus and I built our life here, because Simone's whole childhood is here, because this is the home we made together and I am not leaving it and I am not going to agree to any arrangement that puts its management in anyone's hands but mine. Her jaw tightened, just slightly. We have a lawyer, she said. I know you do, I said. So do I. A silence. We could settle this without the court, she said. Yes, I said. We could. If you drop the petition question entirely and acknowledge that I have the full right to manage this property as Simone's parent and guardian. We just want to be involved. In Simone's life, yes. Always. I want that too. In this house? No. Gloria, I need you to hear this. If you pursue this legally, I will fight it. I will win because I am her mother and the law is clear on that. And fighting it will cost us both money and time and will damage whatever is left of this family's ability to be in the same room without a lawyer. I don't want that. But I will not be pushed out of my home. Earl put his hand on Gloria's arm. It was a small gesture, quiet. But it meant something because Earl was not a man who intervened, and he had chosen this moment to do it. Gloria looked at her husband. Something passed between them. We're not trying to push you out, she said. But she said it differently than she'd said things before. The architecture had changed very slightly. The certainty had a crack in it. Then don't, I said. The legal process did not disappear overnight. Gloria's attorney had sent a letter to Patricia within the week. Patricia had responded. There was a period of about 3 weeks, 3 of the longest weeks of my life, threaded through my grief like a secondary wound, during which I did not know how far this was going to go. What happened was partly legal and partly something else. Patricia moved quickly on the guardianship petition, and the evidence was as clear as evidence could be. I was Simone's mother, I was present, I was stable, the home was in good order, Simone's school was reporting she was being well supported, her therapist had filed a statement, my finances were documented. There was no reasonable argument that appointing me guardian of Simone's estate was anything other than the obvious correct outcome. Gloria's attorney, Patricia, told me later, had reviewed the situation and advised Gloria honestly. There was no viable claim. The most they could do was contest the guardianship petition, and contesting it would require them to argue that I, Simone's present, stable, grieving mother who had done nothing wrong, was somehow unsuitable to manage property on behalf of my own daughter. No judge was going to find that argument compelling. The legal thread evaporated. But the conversation, the real one, the one in the living room that afternoon, that's what actually moved things. Denise told me later that after Gloria got home from my house that day, she cried for 2 hours. Denise had been there. She said Gloria had cried and then been quiet for a long time and then said, I've been making this harder for that girl. Marcus would be furious with me. She hadn't said it to me directly. I heard it through Denise. Maybe someday she'll say it directly and maybe she won't, and I've made my peace with both possibilities. What she did do, 3 days later, was call me and tell me that she was withdrawing from the property question entirely, no contest. No petition. She said it formally, like she was reading from something she'd written down, and I understood that the formality was how she was managing her own dignity in the moment, and I let her have it. I would like to see Simone on weekends when you're comfortable, she said. I'll bring her Saturday, I said. A pause. Thank you, Renata. It was the first time she thanked me for anything in 10 years of being her son's wife. The guardianship was granted 2 months later, straightforward, uncontested, exactly as Patricia had predicted. I stood in the courthouse hallway afterward, holding the paperwork, and thought about Marcus on the 9th day in the hospital. Do it soon. Don't wait. He'd known enough to warn me, and I'd been too deep in grief to move fast enough, and I'd almost paid for it in the worst possible way. I thought about what it would have meant to lose the house. Not abstractly, Specifically, Simone's room, which she decorated herself with constellation stickers on the ceiling and drawings tacked to the walls. The backyard where Marcus had taught her to kick a soccer ball the summer before he got sick. The kitchen where we'd eaten 1,000 family dinners and where I'd learned to make his mother's rice recipe even though his mother had never offered to teach me, and I'd had to ask twice. The bedroom where he'd slept beside me for 4 years and where I still slept on my side and hadn't moved to the middle yet because the middle felt like an admission I wasn't ready to make. My home. I drove home from the courthouse and made Simone's after school snack, and when she came in the door with her backpack hanging off one shoulder and her shoelaces undone, she looked at me with her father's eyes and said, "What are you smiling about?" And I said, "You." And she rolled her eyes in a specific way she had just learned that was somehow both very 7-year-old and very teenager at the same time, and dropped her bag on the floor and went to the refrigerator. I stayed at the kitchen counter for a moment, just holding it. The house was ours. Here's what I know now, 2 years later. I went back and formalized the trust properly, with Patricia's guidance, about 3 months after the guardianship was granted. The house is now in a properly structured trust with Simone as the beneficiary and me as the sole trustee until she turns 25. The documentation is complete. The contingencies are covered. If something happens to me, there is a named successor trustee, a person Simone knows and loves, who would manage things on her behalf. Marcus would be relieved. He was always the one who worried about the structures, the plans, the making sure things were handled. I was the one who said, yes, we'll get to that, and then didn't get to it. I've gotten to it now with a thoroughness that probably would have made him laugh, because when I finally commit to a thing, I commit to it completely. Simone is 9 now. She sees Gloria every other weekend. They bake together and watch old movies, and Gloria tells her stories about Marcus's childhood that I don't know, that I couldn't know, that I am genuinely grateful she's giving Simone access to. Gloria and I are not close. We are cordial in a way that is real rather than performed, which took about 8 months to arrive at after the legal situation resolved. I think we will probably never be close in the way you'd want a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law to be. But I have stopped expecting that, and the stopping of the expectation has made the actual relationship easier to inhabit. Earl and I still hug at the door. That has never changed. Denise is Simone's godmother. She was always supposed to be, and now it's official. My mother was there for everything. Let me say that clearly because I haven't said it enough in this account. My mother drove 40 minutes to take Simone when I needed her to. She answered the phone at 11 at night when I needed to talk. She sat in the courthouse waiting room during the guardianship hearing, even though I told her she didn't need to. She made me eat on the days when I forgot to eat. She did all of this without making me feel like I owed her for it, which is the specific grace of a particular kind of mother. I am still grieving Marcus. 2 years later, I want to be honest about this, because I see grief portrayed in ways that suggest it has an endpoint and a finish line, and I have not found that to be true. What I have found is that the shape of it changes. The acute phase, the phase where breathing through it was itself an effort, where I would be fine for 2 hours and then find one of his shirts in the back of the closet and have to sit down on the floor. That phase gave way to something different. Something that lives more quietly but that does not disappear. Something that occasionally announces itself without warning, and that I have learned to simply make room for rather than manage. Simone asked me last month if Daddy could see her from wherever he was. I told her I believed he could. She thought about this and then said, I think he can see the backyard. I think that's where he watches from. I asked her why. Because that's where we were the most, she said. I looked at her. At the face that had Marcus's eyes and my mother's nose and its own completely specific expression that belonged to nobody but Simone. I think you're right, I said. She nodded, satisfied, and went outside. I watched her from the kitchen window. The backyard in the afternoon light, the grass she plays on, the tree Marcus said he was going to build a swing from and never got around to building, the rose bushes along the back fence that came with the house and that bloom every June without anyone asking them to. My daughter running through the yard her father bought for her. Our home. Ours. I'm posting this in this group because someone asked last week whether anyone had dealt with in-law interference after losing a spouse and whether there was anything they wished they'd known. What I wish I'd known is, do the legal paperwork. All of it. Now. Not when you have time. Not when it feels less morbid. Not when you get around to it. Make the will. Finalize the trust. Name the trustees and the guardians and the successors. Have the conversation with your spouse about what happens if. Have it while it feels unnecessary, while it feels dramatic, while it feels like the kind of thing that only matters to other people. It will matter to you. You just don't know when. What I also wish I'd known is that grief does strange things to people who are otherwise reasonable. Gloria was not, before Marcus died, someone I would have predicted would threaten my home. She was the complicated, sometimes difficult, occasionally loving presence she had always been. Grief found the fault lines in her and widened them, the way water finds cracks in stone. I try to remember that when I think about those weeks. Not to excuse it, but to understand it well enough that the anger doesn't become the whole story. The whole story is bigger than the anger. The whole story includes Marcus on the ninth day, telling me to do it soon. The whole story includes Denise calling me on Thursday evenings with things I needed to know. The whole story includes Earl's hand on Gloria's arm in the living room and everything that gesture meant. The whole story includes Simone, 9 years old, telling me her father watches from the backyard. I live in that whole story, all of it. Every morning I wake up in my house, in my room, and I live in all of it. That's enough. That has to be enough, and some days, not every day, but some days with increasing frequency, it actually is.